Hello, my name is Tim Dwyer, and I'm the current president of the AMFT Board of Directors. And I want to thank you for joining us here today for this very special at-home session. In the last few weeks and months, these have been difficult and starkly revealing days. Amidst a global pandemic and related health concerns, we see a nation of disparities, health, economic impacts, and even disruptions to our daily lives and those of our families. Then we witnessed the heartless and senseless killing of Mr. George Floyd. Mr. Floyd's life, like those of Ahmaud Arbery, Breonna Taylor, and too many others, were tragically taken as a direct result of the systemic racism and oppression that remains a dangerous, unattended wound in the fabric and foundation of this country. Our members, our clients, and our communities are hurting deeply, and we must all stand together in solidarity against systemic racism and injustice. There is no room in our society for inequality, and it is vital that we use our voices, our relationships, and our training to enact real change for human rights and justice for all. As marriage and family therapists, we have a direct responsibility to counter racism. Our training uniquely positions us to understand and recognize the systemic effects that oppression, inequity, overt and covert racism have on individuals and families of color, and we have a distinct role to serve in fostering healing and growth. It is a core value in AMFT to support, promote, and protect diversity, to value all individuals and groups as free from prejudice and oppression as possible, and to foster a climate where equity and mutual respect are intrinsic. To honor that commitment and to continue to ensure our MFTs are equipped with the anti-racism tools to be an impactful part of the necessary change in this country, I am so pleased to be able to introduce today's at-home session featuring national social justice activists and 2019 AMFT keynote speaker, Brittany Packnett Cunningham. Cited by President Barack Obama as a leader whose voice is going to be making a difference for years to come, Brittany is an unapologetic educator, organizer, writer, and speaker. A former teacher, policy expert, and nonprofit executive director, Brittany has committed her life and career to justice. She currently plays many roles, all focused on freedom. Brittany is an NBC News and MSNBC contributor and former directors, leader, and fellow at the Harvard Institute of Politics, exploring social change and the intersectional activism. A lifelong activist and proud member of the Ferguson Uprising, Brittany is co-founder of Campaign Zero, a data-driven, research-based policy platform to end police violence. And she is co-host of the 2019 iHeartRadio Best Political Podcast, Pod Save the People. In 2018, Brittany launched Love and Power, a hub created to inspire, empower, and outfit everyday people to seismically shift society. Brittany was appointed a member of the Ferguson Commission and President Obama's task force on the 21st century policing. Today, she continues to advocate for urgent systemic change at critical decision-making tables and through national and international media. From New Zealand to London, across the United States, and at the White House, Brittany has traveled extensively to impart lessons of movement building, effective social impact, liberatory leadership, and empowerment for women and girls, especially those of color. Joining Brittany today is current AMFT member and former member of the AMFT Board of Directors, Brian Doster. Brian is an associate marriage and family therapist practicing in Orange County, California, working for a community health agency in Los Angeles, California. Brian considers it an honor to work as a therapist daily and recognizes the courage required for clients to sit with him during each visit. He found his path to becoming a therapist after spending a number of dedicated years in corporate America and recognizing he had a call to help people to find space for their mental well-being. Brian is passionate about working with marginalized communities, collaborating with them to find their voice. As a marriage and family therapist, he is equipped as a systemic thinker, understanding the interconnections across cultures, trends, and people. Mental health matters is a mantra that Brian lives by and shares generously when opportunity presents. Brian completed a term on the AMFT Board of Directors just last December, serving on the Elections Council and the Diversity and Inclusivity Steering Committee. Currently, he's an adjunct faculty member at California State University, San Bernardino. He is a graduate of Pepperdine University, receiving his MA in clinical psychology with an emphasis in marriage and family therapy. Currently a doctoral student at North Central University, pursuing his PhD in marriage and family therapy with a specialization in culture, diversity, and social justice. With that, Brian and Brittany, it is my distinct honor to turn this discussion over to you.
So thank you, Tim, for your reflective and warm introduction of myself and our esteemed guest, Mrs. Brittany Packnett Cunningham. Brittany, I just want to say that I am honored to be sitting with you on this morning, and I want to welcome you to our at-home series. And thank you once again for joining forces with the American Association for Marriage and Family Therapists to continue to provide insight into the ways the work of an MFT can be guided by social justice. We are seated in this space, at this time, because at this moment in history, our country is yet in another discussion about police brutality, racism, and the effects of systemic oppression on Black lives. You have agreed to have a conversation with marriage and family therapists who, in my biased opinion, are some of the greatest systemic thinkers of our day. And while there are many of those in our field who privilege the work around racial trauma and institutionalized racism and systemic oppression, I want to acknowledge to some degree our mental health community has not led fully in these areas. Today can be a new day. It is a new opportunity to engage this conversation differently and hopefully move towards action. So let's get started, Brittany. Is that okay with you?
Sounds great, thank you.
Awesome. So Brittany, my journey into a career as a marriage and family therapist came on the heels of the shootings of Trayvon Martin, Sandra Bland, Michael Brown, and the Charleston Massacre, just to name a few of the many. I was also experiencing or hearing the voices of some of those declaring Black Lives Matter in order to disrupt the movement of, All Lives Matter, in order to disrupt the movement of Black Lives Matter. As I entered into my graduate program, I carried the voices of family and friends who were becoming weary of the continued violence upon Black lives. It was not new by any means, but the voices of anger, weariness, and frustration were groundswelling, and it was my concern for the mental health of Black people that was a guiding force for me completing my education. In a way, this moment that we are in feels Groundhog Day-ish, sprinkled with optimism. And I know you were on the front lines at Ferguson, and you were invited by President Obama to join the 21st Century Policing Task Force. So my question to you is, how does this moment feel similar and different?
Well, thank you for having me back. Thank you for this conversation. I have to give a shout out to my own marriage and family therapist who is in the audience today. I obviously will not say who she is, but she is incredible and has been so essential to me and my husband individually and together during this time. I literally would not have made it through this week alone without her. So I'm grateful to you all and all that you do because it is more essential now than ever. In terms of this question about how this moment is similar or different, it is similar in that the conversation and the foundations of this conversation are the same, right? Have always been talking about systemic volume. I saw somebody try to raise my volume. Is that better? My volume any better there? Okay. We have always been talking about systemic racism, whether or not people knew to call it that. We have always been talking about internalized and institutional oppression, whether or not people have always been brave enough to name it that. And I think that what people are discovering in this moment is what a lot of us have been saying for a long time, that the roots of this are as deep as the roots of this country. So the foundation of this conversation, of this moment, of this movement are no different than they were in 2014 in Ferguson, in 2014 in Baltimore, in 2015 in Ohio. These are all the same, you know, and I'm gonna try. People are still saying they can't hear me, and I want to make sure I can be heard, so hold on.
Okay.
Is that any better?
That is great.
Okay, perfect. We will leave the external microphone alone. So as I was saying, if people couldn't hear me, that the foundations of this are still the same, that this is still about systemic oppression, that this is still about systemic and institutional racism, that this is still about the deep trauma that people of color and Black people in particular carry in this country in our genes. And that this moment is still rooted in all of the same things that Ferguson was rooted in, that Baltimore was rooted in, that Ohio was rooted in, that Watts was rooted in, right? That the uprising in Los Angeles following Rodney King was rooted in, that the frustration after Dr. King was assassinated, that it was rooted in, the sadness after Emmett Till was killed. All of these things are rooted in the very same place. And if we are not, we are here once again because we have yet to fully reckon with those sins. We have yet to fully acknowledge them. We have yet to fully name them. We still have folks that are debating the validity of something like the 1619 Project, which not only marked the 400 years of Africans in America, but also very clearly told the story of Black people's essential nature and essential responsibility in democracy in this country. And people are still debating this as if there is debate around that. So what remains true, unfortunately, is that because we have not dug all the way deep into the roots, we have not gotten to the point where we can be beyond a revolution like this. I think what is different, though, and this is important and significant, is that people are much more ready to spring to learning, understanding, and action right now than they were 6 years ago. And 6 years ago, we could not get anybody to say systemic racism except for scholars and activists, right? You did not hear people that were not deeply embedded in that topic already using words that properly communicated just how big and deep this thing is. You had folks thinking still that racism was just about a set of individual actions or interpersonal interactions. You had folks that didn't actually see racism embedded in institutions like policing, let alone other ones. And so even though the circumstances of the cases change, what we saw happen to George Floyd, and I'll be honest in saying that I have not watched the video, it's too traumatic for me. But what I know to be true of that video, because unfortunately I've read the transcripts and all of the articles, is that the circumstances of his death were no more or less horrifying than what happened to Eric Garner 6 years ago. They were no more or less horrifying than Mike Brown laying out in the street for 4 hours. They were no more or less horrifying than a Tatiana Jefferson being killed, a young girl. They were no more or less horrifying than Tamir Rice playing in the park and being shot as a 12-year-old by police in less than 2 seconds of their arrival. They are no more or less horrifying than Breonna Taylor just 2 months ago being killed in her bed when the Louisville police were serving a no-knock warrant. So if the circumstances aren't different, but this moment is different, it is because Black people, Black thinkers, Black scholars, Black therapists, Black writers, Black artists have brought America to this point of readiness for revolution, for uprising that is not simply localized, but spread not even just across the country, but across the entire world. What I think is powerful about this moment is it represents a unique opportunity that comes along perhaps once in several lifetimes to actually see institutions change transformationally in what feels like an instant, but what actually took generations of work to produce.
Thank you. I think about what you said, that there are people who are still possibly questioning the validity of this, right? And that, you know, it's as if there's almost, sometimes you have to convince people of what's happening and why it's relevant. So my question to you is, what would you say to someone who may be confused, even in this moment, why we would have an activist who has been invited to talk to mental health professionals about
Sure.
race and systemic oppression? What would you say to that questioner?
I mean, the first thing I would ask, because I believe in the Socratic method, the first thing that I would ask of the person who is still in disbelief would be, when is it okay for someone you love to be pinned under the knee of an officer for 8 minutes? When are you okay? What is the line that you draw? When are you fine with somebody that you love, or you yourself, being in the circumstance that George Floyd was in? When is it okay for your daughter to be sleeping in her bed and the police already to have the person that they were looking for in custody, but barge into your daughter's home, serve a no-knock warrant, and shoot her 8 times while she's asleep? When is it okay for your son to be running and for somebody to take it upon themselves to find them to be a threat and take their life? I have yet to find anybody who is okay with any of those scenarios I just described applying to them. And yet, for Black people in America, those are not only possible scenarios. Over and over again, for our people, they are probable scenarios. And so if we are, again, not willing to deal with the roots of the problem, we're going to continue to deal with the symptoms. So for folks then who ask about what the display of frustration is in the streets and why are people deciding to exercise their frustration in some of the ways that we're seeing, I would remind them that Dr. King said a riot is the language of the unheard, right? I would remind especially a set of counselors and therapists that we all know that if rage goes unheard, if frustration goes untapped, if harm goes unhealed, it's not just by the person who is holding it, but by the systems they continue to interact with that continue to deepen the harm and keep pouring salt in the wounds and keep reopening the wounds, then you all know better than anybody that that rage will combust at some point, that it is literally impossible to continue to live in unjust and inequitable circumstances and not experience what we are dealing with now. Uprisings have happened worldwide, across the globe, across all eras and time spans. Why? Because inequity is unnatural, because injustice is unnatural. So people are eventually going to find it deep within themselves to do whatever they have within their power to restore the natural order. Justice is divine, not what we're experiencing now. And so I would first ask the questions: when are you okay having this be your circumstance? Having this happen to somebody that you love? When are you okay having to have these conversations with your children, right? Telling them that at any moment somebody could see their skin as a threat and decide that they no longer get to walk the earth. Usually for people who do not live in Black skin or brown skin, they are unable to answer that question because it is not a question that should be answered, right? It should never be okay. And when we help people understand in that way, I tend to find that folks are a bit more open to recognizing that no one wants to live like this and no one should have to live like this, especially not in a society that it exists because in so many ways because of our labor, right? I mean, I bank at Bank of America and have been looking for Black-owned banks. Why? Because when I look back at the era of chattel slavery and I understand how institutions like Bank of America depended not only on enslaved labor, but goods that were being bought by enslavers so that they could use them on their enslaved labor. That was how Bank of America and so many other institutions built the wealth and the capital that they have now, right? We're living in a country where my ancestors were the capital that created the capitalism. And now we keep being harmed by the very systems that we were harmed by in order to build. And again, getting to the roots of all this stuff is actually what's going, people keep asking me what will end the protest. You know what, here's what will end the protest: if we stop dying. How about that? Like, not people asking for order, not more tear gas in the streets, not more pepper spray. What would actually happen if we address the roots of the problem? What would happen if in each of our industries and fields, we actually looked at whether or not things were equitable and we addressed things from the very roots? what if, as therapists, you all took the time to look at what kind of funding is being given to the research that needs to be done? Because as an industry, there would not be so much surprise about what's happening in this moment if the kind of studies that Black therapists, Black researchers have been trying to lift up for years actually get the kind of funding that other ones do, right? Actually get the kind of support and coverage that other ones do. So yes, this is about the institution of policing, but if I'm sitting here talking to marriage and family therapists, I have a responsibility to directly address your role in this. And the role has everything to do with making sure that all of our institutions, all of our fields, all of our clinics, all of our practices are as equitable as possible. And if we don't know how to make them more equitable, then we go seek the experts and resource them to make it so.
Thank you. That, I mean, all the chats, you got people, yes, thank you. And I think that goes along with even where I ask you, what do you say to the person who questions? I think that supports this idea of, like, what do you say to the people who feel seen in this moment, right? Who feel like they've been doing work and they've been trying to move the needle a little bit closer to having the research to support things like racial trauma, systemic oppression. And so how do you even validate them in this moment?
Well, I validate them, and I validate those of you who are on this call for whom that applies by first of all saying thank you. I am a personal and living testimony to the importance of that research, to the importance of that practice. And I have had white counselors and therapists and Black counselors and therapists, but what is true of all of them is that they take seriously what racial trauma does to the body and to the psyche, such that I can have honest and rooted conversations with them, and so that they can actually get at the roots of what I'm dealing with. I have had one therapist that for whom that did not apply. And they were not my therapist for long. Because if you can't validate who I am as a person and everything that I'm walking around with, all of the genetic triumph, all of the genetic trauma, all of the lived experience, all of the pain, all of the suffering, all of the excitement, all of the joy, if you cannot validate and affirm all of that, then it is impossible for you to lead me through my own healing. It is completely impossible. And so to look at me and to assume that all of the things you all learn about how to get through to a person apply except for the racial stuff is to literally not see me. We talk about all the time the danger of color blindness in society, and I think it is especially important in you all's field. I don't want you to not see color. I don't want you to see additionally harmful things because of my color. And there's a distinct difference. If God wanted everybody to be the same, he would have made us all the same. But we can't celebrate diversity without identifying the disparity, right? I heard Stephen Furtick say this earlier this week. And so there's a responsibility that we have to recognize that all of this is fully entangled with my racial identity and my cultural experience in America. My cultural experience in America is different than a Black person who's a Jamaican immigrant in America. My cultural experience in America is different than a Black trans woman in America. And if all of those folks cannot be seen uniquely for who they are, then we can't be led through our healing. So for the folks who've been taking that seriously when it wasn't trendy, when it wasn't popular, when there was little research, so they had to do the research themselves, when there was little money for the research, when they had to beg their university or institution year after year after year to say, we actually need research on, Black wealth, Black wellness rather, Black health, Black marriage, Black love, all of that stuff. For all of the people who have been doing this so that we could be at this point now, having this conversation, I see you. I thank you. I am a living testimony and witness to the power of what you do. And the truth of the matter is, people ask me all the time how I'm able to do what I do and be so clear. And yes, I feel like I have a purpose, but it is because I have a village. And that village includes my therapist. And that village are people who can affirm and validate my experience such that they can help me work through the things I need to do to articulate these kind of conversations and do the work that I do every day. So it is not a nice to have, it is a must have. Like this work, this research, this kind of practice is essential. And lastly, I want to say it's not just essential for people of color. And here's where people get tripped up. If you think that you only need to understand systemic racism through a therapeutic lens for your patients of color and for your clients of color, that is wrong. All people experience racial identity development in this country. You experience and develop a level of understanding of what your race means to you and to other people. When you walk in, if you are white and you walk into a room of all Black people, you are thinking about your race, I promise you. If you are white and you are in a room with all white people, you are not thinking about your race, but that's not because you haven't developed an identity around it. It's because the default in this country is your whiteness, and therefore you have developed an identity around always being the norm, right? And so white people have to have therapists to help them undo that internalized superiority as well. They have to be able to actually understand how that whiteness shows up in the world. And I'm saying whiteness in particular, because that is an identity versus white people, right? I'm not talking about an individual. I'm talking about the identity through which we walk in the world. So this understanding of racial identity development, of systemic racism, of systemic oppression, it applies to the folks who have the privilege and who don't have the privilege. Yes, not all of us are walking around with that kind of internalized trauma, but some of us are walking around with internalized superiority because of our identity, and all of those things need to be able to be addressed through a therapeutic lens. Otherwise, folks can't walk through their healing.
You are preaching. And I say that because I know your Baptist background.
You already know how that goes.
But I want to say this, because what I hear you say is that it's more of a negative impact not to address one's racial identity, right?
That's right.
And so I think it goes along with the theme of our conversation today, the courageous conversation to talk about race and systemic oppression, right? That I want you to bring that into this space with me, because I want to feel seen in that moment. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, that's absolutely fair to say. And I will say in particular, I'll use myself as an example. My husband and I had a very hard time we believe in premarital counseling, and we had a hard time finding a therapist before we got married. So we made a commitment. We got married last October. We made a commitment in January to find somebody right away. And I happened to bump into a friend of mine at the nail salon, which is, that's like a quintessential DC thing, because we always bump into each other at the nail salon. And she was telling me about her and her fiance's therapist. And she also was looking for a job, and I knew some people that were looking for somebody with her skill set. So that was like our good work of the day was to exchange our needs in that moment, that she needed connect with the job and I needed to connect with a therapist. And we got connected with someone who, as I said, is one of your members. And we were literally just sitting there yesterday thanking God for her. But as we have sat on her couch over the 6 months or so that we have been working with her, and as I have worked with her individually, it would not have been possible for us to be surviving a pandemic, a quarantine, and a revolution together without her being able to see this not just as love, but Black love between two Black people who have to live in the world as Black people. So being able to get on Zoom with her after the killing of George Floyd and have a different conversation about how to be a wife for my Black husband, that's precisely what I needed. And if I did not have that, I don't know where we would be right now, right? Just to make it totally plain for folks. So yes, your statement is absolutely right. It is, I would go even further and to say it is malpractice not to be ensuring that you have the training and development as a therapist, and ensuring that in the sessions that you have with your clients that race is not being addressed as fully and wholly as it needs to be. Because our marriage is stronger because we have had a practice that sees us for all of who we are and sees what an important connection and what a revolutionary thing Black love is in America, right? I mean, we have both done some tracing of our roots. His people are from Lima, Ohio. Mine are from Mississippi and Alabama. And so I know that I know that we had ancestors that were enslaved, which means that I can bet that there were families separated in my bloodline. We literally, I say all the time, my existence is resistance because I was not supposed to be here. My bloodline was supposed to be used for labor and then discarded. But here we are generations later with master's degrees and, you know, houses and healthy families. And even if we didn't have all of those things, we're still here. And that is a triumph. In the same way, Black love is a triumph. That there were so many separations and displacements among Black families, and Black love was such a hated thing because it can make us so strong, that to be able to have it and have it out in the open and have it be rich and full and celebrated and supported and prayed over, and to have a good therapist that supports all of that, that is a revolution. And that is the kind of revolution that we want to be taking on as a couple, in addition to what is happening out in the streets, in addition to what I do as an individual. So many people tell us all the time about how much hope we give them. And we're just over here trying to figure it out, just like any other newlywed couple. But I think that people are able to see us living in the midst of Black love with no shame. And that is such a revolution, even in 2020, that I know it gives people hope. And we can do that for people because we have a strong therapeutic foundation from someone who sees our race, not as a deficit, but as an asset, and not as something to ignore, but something to embrace in the therapeutic process.
Thank you so much. Can you tell me what do you see as the strengths of Black love?
Oh my gosh, there are so many. You know, Black love is rich. It has so much humor. The amount of companionship that we built off of our laughter alone, and it is so much of it is laughter steeped in cultural traditions and things that kind of only we've ever known. We both grew up in St. Louis, and so yes, we have nostalgia and memories about that place, but there are also just sayings and habits that we have both figured out that both of our mothers had, and all of those kinds of things have brought us a lot of laughter and joy. The hashtag to our wedding was R&B Sunday because he's Reggie and I'm Brittany. And it was funny because I literally discovered that in the car one day. I put up a little video of us singing on the way to church, and I was like, what should the hashtag be? And I was like, oh, R&B Sunday, Reggie and Brittany. And I was like, oh my gosh, our initials are R&B, which made so much sense because that is our favorite music. And at any given time, you could see the two of us dancing and singing to 90s R&B. The funny story, at our wedding, we got married at a converted warehouse that had been made into an art space by one of our friends in New Orleans in the Bywater district. I mean, you want to talk about revolution. We got married 2 blocks from where Homer Plessy was arrested. And Homer Plessy, of course, that case was the foundation of the separate but equal doctrine. So in a place like literally right on the land of our oppression, we decided to celebrate Black love and Black joy and Black art because we believe that those are the seeds of revolution. So we get married in this place, and I sent the DJ all the songs that we wanted played except for our first dance. And we had picked this PJ Morton song and we totally forgot about it. We didn't forget about it, I forgot about it. And he's over there like, that's what it is. And we had a circular dance floor, so we were literally surrounded by our loved ones. And our two friends, George and Major, are looking at each other like, where's the music? One of them is a DJ, one of them is a singer. So Major literally starts stomping his foot. And they had decided to start singing Weak by SWV, which, if you don't know it, is like a seminal 90s R&B classic. Iconic. It is like one of the best, most beautiful songs ever, sung by 3 women who just can sing down all day long. And so when I tell you we're standing in the middle of this circle of all of our loved ones singing a song that everybody Black our age, some folks younger, some folks older, know. And what they didn't even know was that we used to go to karaoke a lot. And the first song I ever sang to him at karaoke when we were dating was Weak. So I didn't even know that was our song. God had that figured out. But it was a moment that like only Black people could have made, and only Black people could have made in the celebration of love, surrounded by Black art. And so like the music and the alignment with which we operate and the rhythm that we can pick up on immediately in one another is made so special in our love. Black love is incredibly strong. the bonds that are built between certainly spouses and lovers, but also family members, loved ones. I mean, everybody is our cousin, right? Everybody is the extra play auntie or play uncle, because as soon as you come around, we love on you. We want to see you do well. We are invested in what's best for you. And that is the kind of Black people are not perfect people, but Black love is something so strong and revolutionary that it has binded people together when literally everything would separate us. When systems would separate us, when incarceration would separate us, when slavery would separate us, when education would separate us, when medical malpractice and apartheid would separate us, when all of those things tried to separate us, Black love kept us bound anyway. And so yeah, I could go on all day, but there is so much that is special and unique about Black love that I'm deeply grateful that I get to be in the midst of it.
Well, even as you speak, Black love, I mean, even as you were speaking, it just started to become more, right? It started to become more than just the marriage. It started to become about the Black community, right? Yes. And why we gather the way that we do at times and sit in spaces the way that we do and laugh and be there for each other, because it has helped in our resiliency, right?
That's right.
So thank you so much for sharing that. I'm going to pivot for a minute.
Okay.
And Kendrick Sampson, he recently wrote an article for Complex Magazine where he is discussing the idea of liberating mental health, okay? Mm-hmm. And within the healthcare system and society, mental health has not always been identified as a critical component of care.
Yeah.
In the article, Kendrick says our trauma, our existence is criminalized because there is no true mental health care system. Police and prisons are tasked with handling this crisis.
Yeah.
As one in this conversation right now and a person who is an activist, what suggestions can you make for us, for our community, that will help make mental health take its rightful place on the global stage?
Yeah, that's a fantastic question, and a couple of things. First, related specifically to this moment in time, and the work that I have done in activism around police violence, one of the things that we know to be absolutely true is that the role of police in communities, especially Black communities, needs to be completely shrunk down. So I think this is probably not news to any of you, but we all know that there are many, many people who respond to a mental health crisis as if it is a different kind of crisis. Half of the people who are killed by law enforcement either have a mental or physical disability, right? They either have a mental health challenge or they have a physical disability. So what we have to recognize is that the most vulnerable in our society, people of color, Black folks, indigenous folks, immigrants, disabled people, people with mental health challenges, all of those folks are made more vulnerable by our most violent systems, okay? So when we recognize that half of the folks who are killed by law enforcement are folks with a physical or mental disability, we have to recognize that we are addressing the problem in the wrong way. And in cities that already have a small policing footprint, when those folks actually engage with mental health professionals and have mental health professionals approach situations instead of somebody with a gun and a badge, then we actually can get far different outcomes. The problem is we continue to see people wait on law enforcement to change to adopt those policies. There is no reason why the AAMFT, why your practice, why all of the AAMFT members in your city, in your chapter can't get together and approach your law enforcement and say, we're here to help and here's what you need to do. There's no reason why we have to wait on somebody who continues to prove themselves institutionally unfit to build a plan to actually protect us. If we know better, then I can go tell you how to do better, right? So the first thing is there is power that is in this body and in this group of people and in the partners that you have across psychological organizations, etc., to get together and demand that you all are at the planning table and at the execution table to make sure that the people who need your services in emergencies are actually getting your services instead of getting somebody with a gun who is trained to shoot and not trained to heal. Okay? So that's the first thing. On a global stage, I think that so many of us are having conversations about mental health necessarily because we are patients and we are clients, but we're not experts, right? So we will listen to Therapy for Black Girls podcast. We will read the articles. We will talk to our own therapists, and we will speak out of our experiences, just like I have with you all. But you all have done the research. You all have met with the clients. You have the work experience to know what this is. And in order to actually change the societal conversation, there should be a symphony of therapeutic voices talking about the importance of this, both from a standpoint of cultural relevancy and responsiveness, and also from a standpoint of access, right? Because I always qualify, I believe that every single person should have access to quality, culturally responsive mental health care. And a lot of people don't put that culturally responsive part in. I do, because I've had folks that I've recommended therapy to, and then they come back to me and they say, well, it didn't work because I went there and sat and talked to somebody about my racial trauma or something that was related to my racial trauma, and they invalidated me. So now not only has that person not gotten what they needed, they're now potentially turned off to the entire experience and have no interest in going to engage in their healing. So they find other outlets, right? And some of those outlets are healthy and some of them are not. So there should be a symphony of voices. Like, it's great. I'm friends with Kendrick, and it's fantastic that he wrote the article. He's doing such incredible work right now, especially in Los Angeles around divesting and defunding the police. But Kendrick is not a mental health professional, right? Who is gonna, which of you are gonna partner with Kendrick and say, let me co-write this with you? You bring the celebrity factor, I bring the expertise. Which of you are gonna say, hey, Kendrick, I wrote this article, can you read it? And if you like it, share it. Which one of you is gonna say, actually, let's host a celebrity roundtable of Kendrick and Taraji P. Henson and all of these other celebrities that have shown an interest in Black mental health, and actually get them the resources, the talking points that they need to make our voices heard and so that they can amplify us, right? There's no reason why this stuff can't be happening. And yours are the voices we need to be hearing most from. Right now, there are a couple of voices, especially in the Black community, and especially through social media, that we know to look to. But everybody can't get everything that they need from Therapy for Black Girls. You actually have to share the responsibility here, because if it just keeps coming down to the same folks, or if it just keeps coming down to Black therapists, then it's actually not going to be widespread among all the people it needs to be widespread among.
Thank you. I appreciate this idea of Symphony of Voices, the call to action for us to actually go out and partner with these law enforcement agencies, right? Even as you speak.
To be very clear, yeah, sorry, to be clear, okay. Law enforcement, I wanted to be clear. They should be much smaller than they are, right? We see what's happening in Minneapolis. They are disbanding the Minneapolis Police Department, which is totally possible. And they are going to bring together a group of community members to redesign what public safety looks like in Minneapolis. That group of community members should absolutely include therapists. If they don't invite you personally, then say, here's the white paper that me and my chapter put together on exactly what needs to happen here from a mental health standpoint. A lot of times we wait to be invited to the table instead of saying, no, you need my expertise, trust me. So let me give it to you. But sorry, keep going.
No, you're fine. I think that is important. And I think even in this moment, I feel empowered, right? By your words of do this, right? We need you. We're out here, we're reading the information, but we know that you all know you are the experts of this information. And so we want your voices to be involved. So thank you so much. Anything else you want to add to that?
I mean, I would just reemphasize the point that you should be being led by your colleagues who are most affected, but you should not be leaving all of the labor to them. I think a lot of people hear, well, I'm white, or I'm a man, or I'm cis, so let me step back. No. I need you to step back long enough to listen and then say, do you need my support? Do you need my help? Do you need my labor? And then say, okay, is weak to place the burden oppression on the people who are facing the oppression, which in and of itself is an injustice. That does not mean go out there and act in a way that actually invalidates them or doesn't follow the direction of the most oppressed. But your labor, if you are not experiencing the guarantee, if I'm saying bet you. And a bunch of the stuff, they're like, they're tired. And they're sitting here going, this is it. But also, why did it take y'all getting on this Zoom with this girl you don't even know for you to get the point, right? A bunch of your Black colleagues have been saying for a long time, our research is not funded in the same way. And you would have direction on what to do for your clients when it comes to racial trauma or Black love and marriage or whatever it is, if you would actually make sure that our stuff is funded, if you would share the power and resources that you have access to. But instead, we have to keep begging for scraps and your stuff is cool. And then suddenly when you need my resources because the world is burning, you come to me, right? And suddenly I have to do all this extra work when I didn't have the resources to do the work that I was trying to do in the first place, right? They're tired. They're tired. And so however you decide to move ahead, you should be following the direction of the people among you who are most affected and who have shown themselves to understand this work. But if you leave all of the labor to them, listen to them. But if you leave all the labor to them, then you're doing it wrong.
Thank you, Brittany. I wanted to ask about the reimagining policing, the conversations around defunding.
Yeah.
There are people who, when you hear defunding, some people are terrified by the idea, and then you have other people who are excited about the idea of defunding. Yeah. What could you say to kind of address those two perspectives, that tension that is held between that?
I would actually say that there are three perspectives, right? There are folks who hear defunding and they picture complete and utter lawlessness. Like they just picture people getting, killed and robbed and old ladies getting beat up like every which way. And that it's just like the apocalypse outside, right? That is what some people picture. A lot of the folks who fit in that first bucket, frankly, are the folks who have already criminalized Blackness and marginalization, right? So many of those folks are already the Amy Coopers who see a Christian Cooper who is a bird watcher and see a criminal, right? So a lot of those folks have already assumed a level of criminality among marginalized people, such that the idea that the barrier between them and Black people, the idea that the barrier between the suburbs and the hood, which we know is a euphemism for Black, right? Them and the barrier between the nice part of town and the rough part of town, which is also a euphemism and a dog whistle. They don't want to remove the barrier because they don't have any intention of actually living equitably and intersectionally, right? And they are scared to, they don't want to, right? The second group of people are folks who are like, they want justice, they want equity, they absolutely do. They are fed up with what we are dealing with right now, but they can't picture what defunding and disbanding the police could look like. And part of that is because we need to continue to have a narrative conversation around this. So we're not talking about divesting from police and that's it. I always say we have two hands, one to battle and one to build. A lot of people like doing the battling. Everything is about tearing down, destructing, destroying. There are things that absolutely have to be destroyed, but they all have to be replaced. Why? Because we all deserve to live in a safe neighborhood. So what Minneapolis is doing is a prime example of this, because they are saying, if we pull all of the money out of the police department, we gather the people who actually should be leading us through reimagining what policing looks like, we can actually take the research, the lived experience, the work experience of the folks that we have right here in our community and rebuild public safety in our own image and not the image that was handed to us. For so long, we just get sold the idea that the way that things are, the way that they always have to be. So we're not willing to have radical imagination about what's possible. My friend Antonio Saunders, who's a brilliant educator and speaker, he always tells this story about going to the eye doctor, and he had never worn contacts or glasses. And, he starts reading the chart like we all do. And the doctor turns off the lights and he's like, all right, doc, I'll see you later. And the doctor's like, hold on, I'm about to write you a prescription. He said, what are you talking about? I have never in my life needed glasses. My face is too pretty. Leave it alone. Please don't put any glasses on me. His doctor said, your eyes have adjusted to the deficiency before it. Your eyes have adjusted to the deficiencies before it. So you thought you were seeing everything clearly because nobody ever showed you there's a different way to be. There's a different way to live. There's a different way to see. So instead of adjusting to the deficiencies of our society, we can actually write ourselves the prescription, remake our vision of this, and actually move forward in a way that is powerful and equitable for all of us. So that third group of people are the folks who have been leading us through this imagination, right? There are people like Mariam Kaba, who has been helping us imagine a world without police and without prisons, right? There are people who have been willing to step out there bravely and courageously and say, even if none of y'all get it, I can see it. So let me paint the picture for you. And those folks see a world in which not only have we redesigned what public safety looks like with the community that we are a part of, we have also invested in the programs that we know keep communities healthy and safe. It's the summer jobs and employment programs. It's the fair housing where people can actually put their children to bed in a place that won't make them sick. It's ending environmental racism and making sure that the air that we breathe and the water that we drink and the food that we eat is not poisonous to us, right? It is making sure, yes, that there is quality mental health care and substance abuse care for everybody who needs it. So that instead of treating people who have challenges like criminals, we treat them like patients and we focus on their healing instead of harming them. It's about restoration instead of punishment, right? And we have literal data and programmatic evidence of why investing in those things actually keeps communities safer. Police are not keeping communities safer. More police on the street is not reducing crime, and it is not keeping people safer. We know that from the data. But instead, we can invest in the things that keep people whole, healthy, and safe from the ground up, and that don't come with that exchange of the potential for violence. They don't come with that gun. They don't come with that badge. They don't come with that billy club. They don't come with that chokehold. They don't, even if the rule says no chokeholds, they don't come with somebody who is trained to choke you out anyway, right? So we have an opportunity to be our most imaginative selves. And we have in this country a precedent for abolition. I'm very sure that my ancestors couldn't exactly picture what freedom would look like, but they still knew they wanted it. They still knew they deserved it. They still knew that they were worth it. They still knew that their value was not defined by their current circumstance, but by what they could imagine. And so many of them built a world ready for abolition and for freedom, even if they didn't live to see it. That is the kind of bravery that we need to be engaging with right at this very moment, because America is yet again at a tipping point that dramatic. So yeah, it can be scary. It's funny, and I will close with this. I live in DC, so a lot of people probably saw the street that in front of the White House is now Black Lives Matter Avenue, and the mayor had it commissioned, and so it was painted. People loved it, but the activists said, "Wait a minute, you're trying to put another $20 million into the police budget in DC, and so if you actually believe that Black Lives Matter, now is your opportunity to defund the police." So there were activists who went over there and they painted over the stars of the DC flag that had been painted. And so then there are 3 stars and 2 stripes of the DC flag. So they painted over the 3 DC stars. So now the flag looks like an equal sign. And then they went and painted in yellow, defund the police. So Black Lives Matter equals defund the police, right? Brilliant. I'm telling my mom this on the phone and I'm like, yeah, it was great. I'm all for trolling that guy who lives at 1600, but you know, there's some work that needs to be done in the city in which I live to fix this. And my mom, who is, for all intents and purposes, a left of center church woman, right? Like she was like raised with very traditional values, totally believes in a woman's right to choose and totally believes in marriage equality and all that kind of stuff. But she's a very kind of staid and, you know, classy woman. She goes, $20 million. They don't need any more money. And I was like, okay, if my mom can get divesting from the police, anybody can get divesting from the police. We just need to tell the story. We just need to paint the picture. We just need to show folks that it was possible. So yes, troll the guy at 1600 all day long, but do the things that are truly transformative to make sure that the people in this city and our community across this country, across this world are living justly and equitably.
Thank you. What I will say to that is, and what I hope that many will take away from what you just talked about was this idea of reimagining, right? That even in the face of, like you talked to us about funding and making sure the funding is going to projects, right? That brings forth research that validates the work that we're doing now and what we're talking about now. So I think it is a time to reimagine. It looks like our time to wrap up is here. And I have absolutely enjoyed every moment of this.
Me too. Thank you for having me.
Of course, I want to say thank you to the AMFT leadership, the members of the board of directors and staff for executing this conversation. And thank you for always being willing to invest in our membership. Brittany, I want to say thank you for being here today. I personally want to thank you for being courageous and carrying the spirit of boldness that many of our ancestors, like Fannie Lou Hamer, Shirley Chisholm, and Sojourner Truth, carried throughout our history. We are appreciative for your leadership and the continued work you are doing for the movement. As we wrap up, are there any final words you would like to share with the attendees?
I mean, I'd just like to thank you all for this time. I'd like to thank all of you who took the time to listen to this conversation. And most importantly, I would like to thank all of you in advance for everything you're not just going to talk about, but everything that you were going to do coming out of this conversation, coming out of the work that you've already been doing. And so that we can make sure that we truly seize this transformative moment for all people and Black folks especially. And thank you so much, Brian, for leading us through, I think, what was hopefully a great conversation. You asked fantastic questions. I always appreciate a good moderator. So I'm grateful to all that you do in your everyday work, but also for having this conversation.